Okay, welcome to another episode of Mondays with Moshe. It is July 10th, 2023. And tonight we're going to do something that we do occasionally, which is a replay of a discussion that I had in a different venue. I want to give a shout out to Harriet, who's here tonight, has been on here in the past, and hopefully will be on in the future as a presenter. Hi, Harriet Cabelli. Okay, so tonight's conversation is a conversation that occurred a number of weeks ago with Terry Real, who is a licensed clinical social worker, LICSW. And obviously we all know Terry Real. He's a legend in the work of marriage and couples and family. I had somewhat of an enlightening conversation with him. And I'd love to hear some of your feedback. Because tonight's format is a bit different than usual, and it's a replay of a conversation that went on, and it's not live. So I would encourage, I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I would encourage everybody, if you have questions or comments, to let's get some, dialogue going on between some of the participants. Since Terry's not here live, we could talk with each other. So, maybe Nina will have a question, or Esther out in Five Towns will have a question or a comment, and she'll share it, and Harriet will answer. Maybe Yaakov or ID will want to challenge something that Terry's saying, or Yechanan will agree with something that he's saying and wants to bring some emphasis, and we can then have a group discussion about it. That's what I think how I would love to have tonight's conversation, as it was pre-recorded for those of you who are joining. So please raise your hand, because then I'll have to stop the recording of Terry. So if you have a question or a comment, raise your hand and let's get at it. Let's see what Terry has to offer. What are some of the things that he's presenting that are different than other marriage, couples, therapists, counselors? What are some perhaps novel ideas that he might be sharing that are different? What's just recreated and repackaged versus what's a nice new thought or idea that we could walk away from this conversation with Terry? I do want to remind everybody that we're now sponsored, of course, by okclarity.com, which is a great online forum for mental health professionals. And anybody out there who is looking for a mental health professional can search the mental health professionals in the Orthodox Jewish world on okclarity.com. And for anybody who's a therapist, which is our group here, who wants to get themselves out there and develop some publicity, okclarity.com basically is a website that will create your own website for you, and you'll come up in their search. So anybody who goes on to okclarity.com is looking for a mental health professional or a coach in the Orthodox Jewish community can type in the area that they're looking, and your name, profile, and website will come up. So it's just another way of advertising yourself and showing what you're all about without having to create your own website or market yourself. So go to okclarity.com and check out what they can do for you there. Okay, somebody asked, is this a recording from last year? The answer is no, it's a recording from a number of weeks ago that took place during daytime hours. And since Terry was not available at night, he agreed to do this during the daytime. So I was unable to do it live on Mondays with Moshe, but here it is. And let's get into it. So just a reminder, raise your hand. We'll take questions and comments. I want to welcome Terry. Thank you very much for joining us and
thank you.
Giving of your time. I know that we've been in pursuit for quite a while, and I hope that you're doing well and feeling well and
thank you.
Recovering well.
Thank you.
Many more healthy years. So it's really an honor to be here with you, and actually haven't been together in the same room, so to say, in about, I would say, a dozen years ago. I took a training of yours in Brooklyn.
Oh yeah,
that was a long time ago. Before you had gray hairs, probably. So good to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
Okay, so
Yeah, and I just want to say my health is great for those who may be concerned. So
good, thank God. Well, that's great to hear. So, for those of you who don't know, you probably do, but Terry Real is the creator of the relational life therapy. Um, seem to have a lot of mentors and colleagues with whom you work together, including the Pia Melodies and Esther Perel, and so many others who have dedicated and devoted their lives to enhancing people's relationships, really. And that's something that's become so valuable. And I'm seeing in our community, there's so many struggling young couples who are really, really struggling early in their marriages. And so I'd like to, spend some time today. We have about an hour just to spend a little bit of time going through some of your thoughts on the topic. I think I really would want to break this into two segments. The first part would be just hearing some of your philosophies and observations about relationships. And then the second one, perhaps because we're a room of clinicians, maybe we could talk a little bit about the therapist's role in the therapy session in working with relationships. There's like a big distinction in those two topics, and I'd like to try to cover both. Yeah. Okay.
So my language, Moshe, and by the way, pronounce your name the way you like it.
I pronounce it Maishi.
Maishi.
Maishi, yeah. From Moishi.
Moishi.
Yes.
Okay, like Moishe would be Moishi. Okay, great. And please feel free to call me Terry. So my language for what you just said is part A, how to live relationally on this planet. All of us, how to do this. And then part B, what does relational life therapy look like? And how is it different from other therapies? That sound right to you?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Oh, good enough. All right. And, I'm a Jew talking to another Jew. I have a 70-30 no quibble rule. For those of us who like to argue and debate, I say this to my patients. If what I say is 70% right, it's good enough for our this is not.
So Joshua, do you mind keeping the statistics on, keeping the stats? We make sure we don't go. Okay.
Yeah, 69 is not good enough.
69 is close. Okay.
Okay.
Can I start with a little bit of a teaser, I guess, the segment. Yeah. Okay. I think, stereotypically, and I've watched some of your things, so I know some of your thoughts on this, but I'd like you to share it publicly. But stereotypically, people, there seems to be this notion that women come into relationships, with this deep desire for a deep, meaningful connection and relationship or attachment or whatever words we're going to use. And it's the guys who really are in it, either for the sex or for other reasons, or and I want to share just personally in my professional treatment. I see.
Okay, we have a question here from ID. So
just a quick question, a technical question. I don't know if I'm the only one that I hear like a lot of noise. I think because the mic is too close to the computer.
You mean my mic?
I think so. I'm not sure.
Can you give a thumbs up if you're getting a lot of bad feedback? Anybody else? No?
Might be my computer then.
Sounds like it. I'm not hearing anybody else with that problem. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're asking him about the stereotype of the difference between women wanting a relationship and friendship in the marriage, and the stereotypical belief that men are less into that.
See that the predominant complaints that I'm getting from husbands is that they don't feel that their wives are connecting with them well enough. They don't feel that they're getting enough attention, that they're getting enough love, almost the antithesis of what stereotype says. Can you talk a little bit to the relationship aspect and what it is that we're all looking for in relationship?
Yeah, well, we are all looking for connection. And intimate connection is our birthright. Intimate connection is what we as a species are designed for. Somebody needs to mute.
I just
Within the first days, weeks of life, infants turn toward connection. The Attorney General, the Surgeon General of the United States just named loneliness as the #1 health issue in America.
yes.
We know that the absence of intimate connection has been described as on a par to damaging your physical health as smoking a pack and a half of cigarettes a day. Who wants to do that? So we're born to be relational, and that's both men and women. Having said that, by and large, women in our culture are socialized to know more about relationships and want more from relationships than most guys. And what you say is really interesting, Moisha. You say, oh, well, the stereotype is that men are patriarchal, and that women are more relational. But a lot of the men that I see are complaining that they're not getting enough love and connection from their women, to which I would say, with great respect, isn't it interesting? They're not saying we're not connecting. They're saying I'm not getting love from them. And is that really a break? No, that's the guy talking. What have you done for me lately? And that's just a different version of so they're speaking about, I don't feel like I'm getting it emotionally, whereas maybe their dads would have said, I'm just not getting it in bed. And that's a change, but it's still about what I'm getting. It's not what we're giving each other. And that's, look, here's the bottom line. When we talk about gender, women in our culture, what's happening is that after 50 years of feminism, and that's true even in the Orthodox community, feminism has not been asleep. And equally important, women's introduction into the workforce and their changing role in the world. In heterosexual relationships, women across the West are insisting on more connection, responsibility from their men than under patriarchy we raise boys and men to deliver. And I think that what you say is really telling. I don't feel like we're connected. What is she giving to me?
So you're sort of reframing what I heard as a craving for emotional connection to something more of a patriarchal expectation that the wife or the woman provide towards the husband. Is that how you're reframing it?
Yeah, well, that's how you languaged it. And maybe I'm being picky, but it was an interesting way of languaging, and I'll bet that is what you're hearing. And the men have to understand that relationship is not just about what you're getting given, and that is moving out of patriarchy. And one of the things that's very interesting, particularly in your community, and by the way, I'm going back to Brooklyn to do another one, July 18th, I believe.
Yes.
I don't know who's doing it. Maybe you do, but
yeah, I believe it's Nachas Council.
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
Yeah, if you guys are, anybody listening is interesting.
It might actually be held at our offices here in OL. So we're still
there you go. So, but the interesting thing for the Orthodox community is this: moving men, women, and I would even add non-binary people into intimacy is synonymous with moving them beyond patriarchy. Because patriarchy was not built to produce the levels of intimacy that in modern marriage we're asking. We really want to be lifelong lovers. And, you know, we're a couple generations away from the first time you see your husband is you know, at the football. Lifelong lovers is not part of the traditional script. Stable companionship was fine, but we want more. And when I say we want more, I really mean the charge is mostly led by women. It's women who fuel the self-help industry. It's women who drag men into, you know, most of the men I see are what I call wife-mandated referral. And it's women who carry the dissatisfaction. Now, that is not to say that the way women address the dissatisfaction couldn't use a major tune-up. We can talk about that. So
I'm curious, do you, for those of you who treat couples or even men, do you find that the men are complaining in general that they don't feel a sense of closeness with their wives, that they want more from their wives? Or do you agree with what Terry's saying? He seems to be disagreeing with what I'm hearing in my office. Anybody have any experience with that can raise your hand?
So how to live relationally is for both men and women to understand the idea of relationship itself. The delusion of toxic individualism and of patriarchy, which I write about in my new book, Us, are the twin delusions of I stand apart from nature. That's what it means to be an individual. That's what the word means. I'm not in nature, I'm apart from it. And I dominate it, I control it. And I don't know what the what the original language is, would be interesting, but in the King James Version anyway, God gives Adam dominion over all the things that walk and crawl and fly on this earth. Not a good idea. And I talk about replacing the power and control model over nature, whether the nature you're trying to control is your spouse or your kids or your body, got to lose 10 pounds, or your thinking, I've got to be more positive, with what I call ecological wisdom. You're not outside of it and you cannot bend it to your will. That's delusion. That's what the Greeks called hubris, overweening pride. You're in it and you depend on it. Wake up. So once you shift out of I'm above it and I can control it. And by the way, traditionally men direct control, say down, shut up and do what I say. Traditionally women indirect control, which is called manipulation or codependence. That's part of the traditional female role. It's not pretty, but it's true. You know, when you study this stuff, you move into what I call relational recovery. Things the culture nods at aren't so funny. So how many people watching today have seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, right? A lot of them. There's that scene where the mother says, man is the head of the family, but woman is the neck. And where the neck moves, the head moves. And everybody laughs. It's funny. But actually, there's a word for what that gal is saying. It's called manipulation. And it's part of the traditional female role to manipulate men rather than deal with them forthrightly. It isn't safe to deal with them forthrightly.
So it's a sort of coping mechanism.
Absolutely. But it doesn't lead to intimacy.
Right.
And a lot of the reason why men distrust women is because they feel played by them. And there's some truth to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I want women to deal with their men forthrightly. And I want men to get off their high horse and open their ears and give up some of their privilege and stop being defensive and listen and try and deliver. And this is a revolution for both sexes, for women to speak with a clear, open voice and for men to yield. I'm sorry, honey. What can I do to help you feel better? That's a revolution on both sides. And that's what it means to be relational. It isn't that one of you wins and the other one loses. That's old thinking. It's we are both responsible for the biosphere. It is in my interest to make this biosphere work because I breathe it. So, for example, when you start to live relationally, living relationally is synonymous with ecological wisdom. I'm not above it, I'm in it. When you live relationally, the answer to the question who's right and who's wrong is who cares? It doesn't matter. What matters is how are we going to work this thing in a way that works for both of us? This is a whole new way of thinking.
Now, I mean, I think the conclusion of it is just a much more satisfying relationship. And I wonder, you're talking almost, historically about the roles of husbands and wives. Has this been so this patriarchal, domination, I guess you would call it, has this been since the beginning of time, or was there ever a time? I mean, because it seems like people can have such satisfying relationships and really develop their self-esteem and, feel happy and calm and serene through the relationships. Is this something that's novice?
Well, are people so happy and calm in there? I mean, 1 out of 2 relationships end in divorce. It may be different in your community because there's more external support to keep them together, but just surviving doesn't mean you're very happy. I think that we've raised the bar. But we really want to be lifelong lovers. We want long walks on the beach, and holding hand and heart to heart, and be each other's best friends, and great sex in your 60s and 70s and beyond. And no, the traditional forms were not built to sustain that. You have to know what you're doing. You have to learn. I talk about a relational technology. So let me give you. Well, first of all, let me give you an example of moving out of patriarchal thinking. Here's you guys are in New York. I lived in New York for 10 years. I'm from Jersey. Tell me if you ever heard this one, you therapist. We'll do totally straight, heteronormative. She says, you're a reckless driver. He says, you're overly nervous. Anybody ever been in that one? Or seen it in your office? They get into what I call an objectivity battle. Is it this or is it that? And one of the bitter pills I teach people is objectivity has no place in personal relationship. Doesn't matter. Who cares? So are you reckless? Well, no, I'm not reckless, blah, blah, blah. Well, listen, you got a ticket when, each one argues their case and they've been snagged by the losing strategy of proving who's right and who's wrong. One session with me, it goes like this. Honey, I know that you don't think you're a reckless driver. You think you're an assertive, aggressive driver, but very confident. Here's the deal. I know you love me. When I sit in the car next to you, I get myself crazy. I am literally on the edge of my seat driving with you. It is a horrible experience. I know you love me. You don't want me to sit there terrified the whole time I'm driving with you. As a favor to me, could you slow down as an act of love for me? And he says, sure. And a fight that could have lasted 40 years, we all know people this is true of, was ended in 10 minutes because they shifted out of that individualistic, who's right, who's wrong frame, to we're a team, let's work together, let's be relational. And once you shift out of that you versus me into us, everything changes. I just want to name 2 skills. 1, telling the truth with love. Under patriarchy, you can be connected or you can be powerful, but you can't be both at the same time. Because power is power over, it's not power with. So when you step into power, you break connection. And what happens, and this is true for a lot of women, what happens is when you move from accommodation, which is quote unquote feminine, to power, which is quote unquote masculine, you get pretty hard-edged about the whole thing. I call this individual empowerment, which a lot of therapists support. I call this, I was weak, now I'm strong, go screw yourself. I'm going to say it any way I want. Relational empowerment combines connection and power at the same time. Honey, I want to hear what you have to say. Could you drop your voice and be kinder to me so I can really listen? How different is that? That I'm not going to let you talk to me like that. Two different ways of saying the same thing. But one's about me, the other one's about us. You can be powerful and relational at the same time, but you have to learn how to do it.
You know, Terry, it's so interesting. You know, maybe to step out of line for a minute, but I recently created a course for newlywed couples, specifically for newlywed couples who are just, you know, beginning their relationship journey before it's too entrenched, you know, in something a negative pattern. And it's an experiential attachment-based course, not didactic, you know, where I'm not teaching information, but I'm actually having them cultivate relationships together. And I call the course Making Your Soulmate, you know, taking it out of finding your soulmate. You actually have to make your soulmate. And some of the things that I teach in it are concepts that I call mutual understanding and mutual agreement. So, you know, sort of to play on what you're saying, there has to be an understanding that's established in the relationship that when I raise my voice at you, or when I snap at you, or, you know, say something that feels like I'm putting you down or being condescending, there has to be this mutual, ongoing, continuous understanding that I care about you and I love you and I respect you. And then mutual meaning, which is, and sometimes what it means when I do this, or I behave this way, is that I'm in a bad mood or I got triggered by something. So we have to sort of create context in relationships. You know, what does it mean when I behave the way I do? And what doesn't it mean? Doesn't mean I respect you less or I don't love you. And then what I call mutual agreement, which is, it's true that you may feel that way about me, you may respect me and love me, and you also can't continue to scream and yell and snap at me all day. So what are we going to What are we going to do about that? What are we going to agree to do about that?
Right.
And so this is sort of underlying established premise to our relationship that needs to be cultivated and understood. You know, that sort of, and then there's something that I call deep communication. Deep spelled DEAP, which stands for direct, because like you said, we want to communicate directly. No manipulation. Let's say what it is that I need from you to do differently. Entitled is the E, which is I feel entitled to get my needs met, not in a bad way, but a healthy entitled.
Yeah.
The A is assertive, where I assert it because I'm entitled to it, so please get it met without being aggressive or passive. And the P is precise. Be precise about what it is that you want. That's my deep communication. So just seems very.
That's great. I like it. And then you have to let go of outcome. You've done your job on your end, and on Tuesday your partner rises to the occasion and gives it to you, and on Thursday they don't. The issue for me also is about trauma and adaptation. All relationships are an endless dance of harmony, disharmony, and repair, closeness, disruption, and a return to closeness. So when your couple says, okay, look, let's contextualize your yelling and screaming, understand what the forces were that were at play for you. And also, you can't keep doing it. You got to do something about this. That's repair. And what makes life dicey is that when we move into disharmony, for reasons we can get into, you move into your early childhood trauma. And my pal Gabor Mate says, in relationships, you don't see the wound, you see the scar. You don't see what I call the wounded child part of the person, subcortical, very reactive, flooded. You see what I call the adaptive child part of the person, how you adapted to whatever the wounds were that you were contending with. And the issue is that a great many of us have lived most of our lives and run our relationships out of our adaptive child part, thinking that it's the wise adult prefrontal cortex, and it's not. It's an automatic knee jerk. I do the same damn thing every single time, and it's what gets us into trouble. So the other skill I wanted to just name before we moved into therapy, the core skill in relational work, as I define it, is what we call relational mindfulness. When you're triggered, when you're flooded, when you're reactive, fight, flight, or fix, when you're in that knee-jerk response, take a breath, take a break. I'm a big fan of breaks. Take a walk around the block. Do what you need to do to get recentered in that prefrontal cortex, the wise adult part of you that remembers the biosphere. This isn't about I win, you lose. This is about us. And literally, the part of the brain that can remember relationships, the prefrontal cortex, shuts down when we're trauma triggered, and the limbic system lights up. So you have to go back into that part of you. One of the things I say is the first step in repair is getting situated in the part of you that wants repair to begin with, rather than ground your partner into the ground. So I call this remembering love, remembering that the person you're speaking to is a person you care about. And the reason why you're speaking is to make things better. And if you're not situated in that plan, that's okay. We're all getting immature parts of it, but own it and keep your mouth shut. Take a walk around the block. I wanted to give you, before we move to therapy, an example of how, what this, I want to tell you a story. I like to tell you. May I?
Yes, you may. I know you like to tell stories, and they're always well received. So
Right. Thank you. True story. I specialize on couples on the brink of divorce that no one else is, but that's my beat. And the couples on the brink of why? A guy's a chronic liar. It lies about everything. His wife says, if you ask him what kind of shoes those were, he said, they're not shoes, they're sneakers. I mean, he just lied about everything. Okay. So that's his adaptive child. That's not his wise adult. Wise adults don't lie. All right. So the question, because I'm relational, is what was this adaptive child adapting to? Or more precisely, who was he adapting to? If I ask a question, if you're not used to thinking relationally, it sounds brilliant, but it's rolling off a lot. I say to this guy, who tried to control you growing up? Sure enough, my father. Tell me about it. Military man, how I sat, ate, my friends, my courses, my clothes, everything. How did you deal with this controlling father? He looks at me and smiles. That smile is important. That's the energy of resistance. That's life force. I lied, he said. My father said, don't play with Henry. I played with Henry. I told him I played with Frank. Smart boy. Smart little boy. I teach my students, always be respectful of the exquisite intelligence of the adaptive child. You did back then just what you needed to do to preserve yourself and your integrity. Clever little boy. But I have a saying, adaptive then, maladaptive now. You're not that 4-year-old boy dodging your father, and she's not your father. That's it. That was the whole session. They come back 2 weeks later. It's absolutely true. Arm in arm, happy as clams, we're done. And they were done. Tell me that there's a story here. Over the weekend, she sent him to the store to get, 12 things. And true to form, he shows up with 11. She says to him, where's the pumpernickel? He said, and I want everybody to feel this. He said, every muscle and nerve in my body was screaming to say they were out of it. I think we all recognize that moment. And I took a breath. I thought of you, Terry. We therapists can lend our prefrontal cortex to our clients. I thought of you. I looked my wife in the eye and I said, I forgot the damn puppy. And she, true story, burst into tears. And she said, I've been waiting for this moment for 25 years.
Oh,
That's recovery.
no.
That's what we're looking for. Moving beyond the adaptive child part of you to the thoughtful, deliberate, learned skill part of you that can choose to do something different. That's the way out of the map.
Well, I have a similar anecdote that just happened this week in my office. It's a couple who's struggling where the wife is very highly religious, and she married her husband who she thought was that religious, but he really isn't and doesn't want to be that religious. And she's very angry at him and says she doesn't like him. She actually says she doesn't like him, even though he has some qualities. And they brought in a incident that happened this week where she wasn't feeling well and she slept till 11 o'clock in the morning, and he stayed home and watched the children for 5 hours from 7 to 11. And then later in the day, she called him a name. She said, he's nasty. And he said, I'm very, very hurt that you called me nasty. I stayed up this morning, for 5 hours, I watched the kids so you could stay in bed and rest. And how can you call me nasty? And she says, well, why are you bringing in other things? I appreciate what you did, and I'm still upset at you. And then, as they were going back and forth in the session, he said, you're not understanding how hurtful it is to me. And she's saying, well, you're conflating the fact that you stayed up and watched the kids and helped out, and I feel like what you're doing is all you want is for me to give back to you, and that's why you helped me. And they were going back and forth. And then he said, why is it that you put all your emphasis on being so religious, but when it comes to being nice to me, suddenly it doesn't cure? Why don't you put your emphasis on that? And she became enraged. And she wanted to say something, and then she couldn't talk. She was just burst out crying and couldn't stop crying for about 10 minutes. And, when she finally got it out of herself, she said that hurts me. That makes me so angry, because that's what my mother always used to tell me as I was becoming more religious. She would say, look, you're so careful about how long your skirts are, but you get angry and you're nasty to daddy. And what if you're so religious, why don't you care about that? And she was so, this is clearly a theme that's coming up for them in their disconnect. So that again, that limbic system, is blocking and getting in the way of their ability to hold each other.
Hmm. Yeah, which brings me to another skill I just want to name, and then I want to go to therapy, which is the art of repair. Speaking out with love is a skill that we have to teach people how to do. And then responding without being defensive or going tit for tat. A bitter pill we teach people is that repair is a one-way street. When you're faced with a disgruntled partner, it's in your interest to bring them back into harmony with you. But your issues, nobody cares about. Your defense. So you are at their service. And everybody gets that wrong. It's not a dialogue.
Mhm.
It's not a conversation. There's one thing. I'm sorry you feel bad. I love you. If there's something I could say or do that would help you feel better,
Mhm.
let me move you back into repair with me. And you have to sort of let go of your ego in order to be that generous to your partner. But it's not about you're being a wimp and you're letting your partner walk over you. It's about, let me take care of my biosphere. I get these big burly guys and they say to me, why should I have to work so hard to make my wife happy? And I go like, knock, knock. You live with them, remember? I don't talk about it. It's in your interest.
Happy, right? But Terry, I mean, I think this is one of the great challenges in couples work, is that you're dealing with people's more primitive parts, and it's not just between them and themselves. You know, when we're working in individual therapy, so it's dynamic. You know, there's parts of me that I like and parts of me that I hate, parts of me that come up in different instances. But here you're watching, you know, in a laboratory, you're observing primitive parts come out, and people sometimes can grasp it cognitively, you know, but not emotionally. And some people can't even grasp, they're so emotionally
Flooded,
or overflowing.
flooded. Yeah.
They're flooded, but they're also overflowing, that they can't
Right.
even grasp it cognitively. It's like, no,
Right.
this is principle. And so the segueing into that, into the therapy, and by the way, everybody, for all those of you who may have questions, please raise your hand and we'll take the questions. But, you know, segueing into the therapy part, what is the role of the therapist in life therapy?
Well, that's a great segue, Moshe, because there are three phases in RLT. The first is loving confrontation. This is what you're doing over and over again. This is the adaptive child move, like lying or self-righteous indignation or control. These are the things you're doing over and over again that will never work, will never get you what you want. But you have to confront the person with love. You don't beat them over the head. It's like, come on, let me teach you. You can do better than that. You're a decent person who has not been behaving so decently. Let me rescue the real you from that nonsense. So there's an art to it. We have a 2-year training program. Any fool can clobber somebody with the truth, but joining through the truth, the first phase, brings the client closer to you while you're confronting them. It's the opposite of what we learned in school, but you have to know how to do it. Anyway, that's the first phase.
You're also modeling by speaking to the client that way. You're modeling for them and their spouse to be able to speak that way with each other. They learn that it's not, it doesn't have a bad outcome. You know, it's not something that's you're losing because of it.
That's right. That's right. Look, healthy self-esteem is holding yourself in warm regard, even while you feel bad about bad behavior or even big character traits. Shame is beating yourself up for it, and shamelessness is not feeling bad. So healthy self-esteem is guilt. Healthy self-esteem is, I feel proportionally bad about the bad things I do. I still can hold myself in warm regard, even in the face of that. I'm a flawed human being like everybody else. I'm okay. Joining through the truth is like therapeutic self-esteem in action. I hold Moshe in warm regard, even while I'm casting a very cool eye at your bad behavior toward your family. And I can do both at the same time. Anyway, that's the first phase. The third phase is teaching. Let me teach you how to do this differently. Let me teach you how to get your needs met without stomping around and acting like a prince. Let me teach you how to make repair and listen to a disgruntled partner without going tit for tat and countering with what you're doing. No, that's not. Let me teach you how to do it better. But in between these two phases, which goes back to what you were saying, is trauma work. And we're quite unique in that we do deep character work and trauma work while the partner's sitting next to you. Let's go back to that controlling father. Let's go back to that little 4-year-old boy who learned to lie. And we literally do inner child work. I want you to connect with that boy. I want you to put him in a chair in front of you. Tell me what it feels like to look at him. What do you want to say to him? What does he want to say to you? And the trauma work that we do is relational. It's not like, for example, IFS or other forms of trauma work about releasing. It's about the wise adult part of you coming into relationship with these younger, either wounded or adaptive parts of you, to reparent them, to love them, hear them, nurture them, and also contain them. I like to say, when an inner child kicks up, you want to put them on your lap, you want to put your arms around them and hear them, and you want to take their sticky hands off the steering wheel. You're not running my marriage, I am. Little Terry, you take a back seat. And this management, an inner child is a fanciful way of describing a trauma state. That's all it is. But there's a separation that comes, which can really be blessed. That's what Dick Schwartz called unblending. If you are plagued with an outside feeling, it's not you. It's that younger you that is carrying that feeling. And you can learn the art of asking that part of you to step aside a little air and daylight, so that you can tend to that angry little boy or that frightened little girl. You put your arms around them. But one of the things I say, Moshe, is that maturity comes when we deal with our inner children and don't inflict them on our partners to deal with.
Mhm.
So as RLT therapists, we go through these three phases. Let's take a look at what that adaptive child part of you learned to do that you keep repeating automatically. For example, angry pursuit will never work. Complaining about how your partner's not close to you will never make them close to you. Let's take a look at that. Then two, where did this come from? Where did you learn that?
So
Who did you
I
see
think I'm
do
hearing
it?
you say the three stages here. The first one sounds very Rogerian like, where the client needs to feel safe in the safe and respected, in spite of what the therapist may call them out on or observe about them, and they have to be able to hold that dialectic. And then the second one is more the inner child work of what are you struggling with here that's causing you to behave or act out in the way you are. And then the third stage is more of a psychoeducation or teaching, or maybe even cultivating between the two parties a new way to relate. Is that about right?
Yeah, the Rogerian isn't so Rogerian that you don't confront them. So it's a combination of the two. The inner child work is really trauma work, and it's very emotional. People really go down, they cry, they sob, and it opens the heart of the other partner to watch them do that. So much more intimacy building than the person going off and doing it in their individual therapist's office. And then the third one is teaching. Let me teach you how to stand up for yourself and be loving at the same time. Let me teach you how to listen to a disgruntled partner and put yourself aside and really be there for them. A lot of the trauma people today think that if you remove the trauma, people will just know how to do it.
Right.
They're wrong. And on the other hand, a lot of the skills-based people think if you just teach them skills, the trauma won't flood them, and they're wrong. You have to deal with all three.
So we have to be able to balance what's coming up for both partners and their responses. I imagine that in some circumstances, having one spouse become so vulnerable in front of the other is not in order. Would that be the case?
There are some if the other person is going to use it against them,
or
if they're vicious, or in RLT we talk about 3 preconditions for doing any intimacy work. You have to address these first: untreated psychiatric disorders, depression, anxiety, ADHD. That has to be dealt with before you can honestly say you're going to help people get closer to each other. Serious self-medication, addiction, porn, drinking, whatever.
Right.
And then if there's acting out, either sexual or aggressive, we don't ask people to tell truth to power if it's dangerous to do so. For example, domestic violence is a contraindication for all couples therapy. So if there are any of these preconditions, we don't do trauma work in front of the person. And if the person's going to be mean about it,
right,
we don't do trauma work. But it doesn't mean that we don't deal with the mean person and get them to be less mean. But while if they're going to use it against them, then that's a contraindication.
I imagine there's other things besides that, such as if it floods the other party, or they can't, it's too overwhelming for them to observe and see their partner become vulnerable, or if they're not ready for it yet. And that's in that sense.
I gotta tell you, we have very high expectations of our client. I think that a lot of therapists treat their clients as if they're like little fragile hothouse flowers. And if someone starts to get flooded or overwhelmed, that just means that they're in their trauma. I would take a break with the first person, turn to the flooding person, and do trauma work with that person. But these extreme states don't scare me. We deal with them. Remember, an extreme state it just is a young part of you that's being trauma triggered in the present.
Mhm.
But we do trauma work. So, okay, what's coming up? Let's deal with it. I'm not so scared off by that stuff.
So if it's done properly, then you're obviously generating tremendous empathy from both parties.
Yes, because your partner is stuck with your adaptive child. Your partner's stuck with that angry little boy or that, placating little girl or whatever. And it drives them crazy. You have to live with them. Now they get to see the story. They get to see where this comes from. So it opens the heart and gives you some compassion for it.
Excellent. Tell us some of the skills or, that you teach to couples or how you teach them. I think so many of us have different language and how we teach skills. What are some of the, more common skills that couples need to learn?
I think, first of all, you need to learn that relationships are not endlessly harmonious. You need to embrace disharmony. You need to embrace mess. You need to embrace human imperfection. I talk about relational shame, which is just like individual shame. Individual shame. Relational shame is walking into a party and assuming that the couple to the left and the right of you are having better sex and fewer fights than you are, without understanding that they're thinking the same thing about you. So we're all human, we all lose it. Harmony, disharmony, and repair. One of the things I teach people is it isn't what you do, it's what you do after you do what you do. Can you say you're sorry? Can you be accountable?
And I would add to that, I think more so, the more that you can repair, the safer you become with each other, because you now know something that you didn't know previously, which is that when we get into a rupture in our relationship, we can face each other, talk about it, make amends, apologize, hold, and the relationship itself just becomes stronger, just in that way.
That's exactly right. And I base this work on a famous infant observational researcher, Ed Tronick, Tronick. And he's the one who came up with this. And what he says is really clear. Look, our culture is obsessed with the harmony phase. You're talking to the guy who coined the term normal marital hatred. I agree. And in 30 years, I've been lecturing around the world, and not one person has ever said, what do you mean by that? Mess is part of human existence. Hating your partner is fine if it's of an evening and not most of your. We're all the bozos on this spot. It's messy, but what Tronick says is exactly what you say for an infant. We all talk about basic trust in psychology. Basic trust, according to Tronick, is not a valhalla of uninterrupted attunement. Basic trust comes from the mess and surviving the mess together. We got through this together. That's what breeds trust in infants, and that's what breeds trust in adults as well.
So would you say the paradigm to that is the baby bites the mother's breast, the mother gets mad, pulls the baby away, but then pulls the baby back and comforts and consoles the baby who's panicking and crying because he was insulted or hurt by the mother. So this
Tronick has a famous clip. The baby is molded, a noodle, no bone, totally comfortable. And then something, gas or hunger or whatever, and the baby starts freaking out. And the mother tries to comfort. That doesn't work. And the mother starts freaking out. The baby gets furious. The mother gets furious. The mother glares down at the baby with this sort of hatred. The little daughter and she's like 4 or 5 months old, but covers her face to shield herself from the hateful glare of the mother, and then the nipples accepted, and we're back to molded again. You can see this on YouTube. The beauty of that dance is it's 40 seconds long.
Wow. And
Harmony, just harmony and repair, over
it's
and
continual,
over.
continual.
Yeah. But it can also stretch at the macro level. I talk about 3 phases of the honeymoon phase. I call love without knowledge.
Mhm.
You have a soul connection maybe, but you don't know what they do. You don't know what the bottom of their closet looks like.
Right.
The disharmony phase I call knowledge without love. Now you see your partner's imperfections, but you don't like it very much.
Mhm.
And then the third phase I call knowing love. And I'm sure this is in the culture, in Orthodox canon. Mature love is seeing your partner's warts and moles, and they're good enough, choosing to love them anyway. It's like self-esteem. I see my imperfections, and it's still okay.
You know, you're raising something so interesting that I never thought about before. I think what I'm hearing you say is that in a average, good enough mother-infant relationship, we are the child is becoming conditioned to tolerate imperfections in relationships or imperfect relationships, to learn that those are okay and they're not so scary like we might see in a disorganized attachment style. Or
Right.
We're actually being conditioned to be able to tolerate rejection and learn that that's not the end all. Is that
because it's our one of the things look, what we all long for is the divine. What we all long for, this is part of the spirituality of real relationships, and I do believe that intimacy is a spiritual practice. What we long for is a god or goddess who's going to come and complete us and heal us and just be perfect. What we're stuck with is a woefully limited human being who's just as imperfect as we are. And it's the collision of your imperfection and mine and how we manage that collision. That's the stuff of intimacy. That's the guts of it. That's the character of what I wouldn't want an uninterrupted, harmonious. How boring. That's for angels. I want the rough and tumble of a human being colliding with another human being, whether it's mother and infant or whether it's two adults. You drive me crazy, and I want Belinda, my wife, and I may one of these days actually write it, but we tease about writing a memoir of our marriage, and I have the title already. The title of the memoir is A Fight Worth Having. That's a good marriage.
Well, okay, let's take a question from Mendel. Go ahead, Mendel.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, it's tough because we know physiologically that early phase you're flooded with feel-good hormones and neurotransmitters, and you're there for 3 to 9 months before they go away. You're literally besotted. And you could try and go, well, what's this person going to be like when all is settled down? There's some probing things you can ask. You can bring them to somebody like Moshe, and he'll probe. Good to ask about previous relationships. Good to meet them with friends, different contexts. You want to sort of get the flavor of how insightful is this person? How psychologically minded are they? How accountable are they? When is everybody else to blame, or are they able to see that? So you want to try and gauge the maturity level, the emotional maturity level of the person. But in the early phases, it's hard to extrapolate. I talk about what I call the mysticism of marriage. Falling in love is thinking that this person's going to be wonderful and complete us. The real relationship comes when you realize this person is exquisitely designed to what I call stick the burning spear right into your eyeball. We all wind up with people who are going to drive us right back into the old wounds. You can't avoid it. That doesn't mean you're in a bad relationship. What you do once you're in it together, that determines whether you're in a good or bad relationship. So you can try and sort this out, but I think God has plans for you. And we all wind up with somebody who's going to resurface with us all the stuff we want to run away from, but all the stuff we need to resurface in order to heal the different. That's the opportunity of intimacy in marriage. But do your best to judge and to trust in faith.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Terry Real for joining us and giving up his time after a long pursuit. Thank you for doing this for us and sharing your knowledge with the mental health community and your expertise. I want to thank OHEL and all the related. Okay, so there you have it, Terry Real, just a couple of weeks ago. Wondering if anybody has any questions or thoughts or comments. Lines, open the lines. Go ahead, Esther.
There we go. So if one person is less mature, we're saying, how do you deal with that? Like
Yeah, I mean,
really
you know,
less
Terry
mature.
has a little
He
bit of
addressed
different.
it a little. Yeah, I'm
He
sorry.
has a little bit of a different perspective than I do. I think I would, you know, he said he has very high expectations for his clients. But I you know, we've seen in the therapy room is that clients cannot always hold or tolerate their spouse's dysregulation because they become flooded. He seems to imply, again, I don't know his model, but he seemed to imply that when that happens, he can, you know, take a pause with this spouse and go to the other spouse and address the trauma there. So that to me sounds like a lot of refereeing, so to say. I'm not sure, you know, I would think that sometimes to have the spouse in the room, or I should say at some stages in the therapy, it might be counterintuitive. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
And I'm wondering if maybe that the person who is less mature really needs to go through some real work, inner work, like, you know, on their own.
To do one-on-one work, you mean?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that would be indicated for sure. Does anybody else have thoughts on that? I mean, have you been able to navigate or manage a spouse when the other spouse is, you know, dysregulation is flooding them and they can't hold it and they can actually become detrimental in the dynamic? Anybody? Sophia, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Second. Hi, how are you? So actually I've actually watched Terry do an experiential with couples where he'll go back and forth, like you said, when the other couple's flooded. But the way he actually does it is that he does recommend individual therapy for the couple that, you know, he feels needs to do a lot more inner child trauma work. And I've seen him actually recommend it for both spouses. Like, you know, you do your work, do a
But
couple's work.
does he agree that sometimes it's contraindicated to have both spouses in the room when one is getting vulnerable and the other one, you know, is? Sherry, you have something to say?
He said it. He said it in the lecture because I wrote it down. He said there are like 3 different situations where you have to have them separate. One of them is with personality disorders, meaning when they're too much in the adaptive and they can't get out of it. So he mentioned it in the lecture that you just taped.
Okay.
Right. And so he does send the couples to individual therapy. But he'll do the inner child work, but like you said, in segments, not like the entire, sessions of the treatment. Like he'll get to it probably mostly in the beginning, and then he'll send you to do the inner child work, and then bring you back to do the couples. So it's actually fascinating to watch him do it.
Do you know if there's any videos of him available for the public?
I mean, actually, I'm doing the Nachas, the Terry relational, the
Training.
whole thing. So I do have the videos because it's part of the,
Or you don't know if there's no public videos?
yeah,
Okay.
correct.
Anybody else?
And is it very different? I'm sorry to interrupt. Is it very different from EFT, his relational work?
So it's funny, somebody said EFT is like, RLT is the next level of EFT. It's like, he says like, it's EFT on steroids, basically. It's like the deeper work. Yeah, very similar. Very similar. I did EFT also, very similar. But it's just much deeper, a higher level. Yeah.
Okay, well, this concludes another episode of Mondays with Maishi. And I hope you enjoyed. It's again different format than we usually do. So good night and hope to see you next week, July 17th. And so long. Take care.